started with the review, I'm sure you guys have noticed that the background looks a little bit different this time around. That is because I am at my good friend O'Magnus Batman's house. Me and him are working on a little something together, we're collaborating, and he went off to go see Gemini Man, and so I decided to use this time to shoot my own review of Gemini Man since I saw it last night. Of course, this means that since he's going out to see Gemini Man and I'm reviewing Gemini Man, then that means my review of Gemini Man will probably be up before his. In your face, bitch. All jokes aside though, I am here today to talk about Gemini Man, a film that is directed by Ang Lee. If you don't know who Ang Lee is, there was a Hulk movie that came out in the early 2000s that has his name on it. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is like one of the best movies ever made in my opinion. And then you got Life of Pi. Yes, technically I know it's Life of Pi, but I'm gonna keep calling it Life of Pi because let's be honest, that movie is just so much more hilarious when it's called Life of Pi. Come on, unless you're Patti LaBelle and you've got recipes that are worth millions or something like that, nobody lives a life of pie anyway. Life of Pi is the only thing that makes sense. I mean, hell, all of us are on a Life of Pi when we've had a little bit too much to drink. What am I doing? I'm rambling. This has nothing to do with my review for Gemini Man, and I'm probably doing that because my rambling is a little bit more interesting than the movie I'm about to talk about. Either way, this film stars Will Smith, and it stars Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Benedict Wong. Stop me if you've heard this story before. So there's an older guy, an assassin, played by Will Smith, one of the best in the world at what he does. On the verge of retirement, he is all of a sudden hunted down by a person who looks strikingly similar to him. This person has the same hair as him, the same dimples, the same haha that Will Smith be doing. It's the same thing, basically. They're the same person. Of course, the older Will Smith has to try to evade being killed by the younger Will Smith, and now he has to try to figure out why this is happening, and there's some kind of conspiracy, and you know, same old, same old. Know that right off the bat, once I give you that synopsis and I sound like I'm bitching about the movie already, you probably don't have high hopes in terms of this movie being good. And you know what? Trust that instinct. Let's talk about the good of this movie, because there are a couple of things I like. I feel like it's as cliche as the story in this movie to say that Will Smith is good because Will Smith is a good actor. I feel like most people are gonna go into a movie with Will Smith expecting Will Smith to give a good performance. Granted, the quality of his movies has been like this since Pursuit of Happiness and I Am Legend in the mid-2000s, but still, I like the trademark charisma that he flashes with the role, and he also combines that with a really good sense of world weariness and wear and tear that really benefits his character. Likewise, Mary Elizabeth Winstead is good in this movie. She's giving a solid performance. Benedict Wong is probably the cast member that I appreciated the most. Appreciated his humor the most. He made me laugh the most times. Also, there is one standout action sequence. I gotta give them credit for this. There was one action sequence that involves kind of a cat and mouse shootout in the middle of a city. This culminates in a really exciting motorcycle chase, and I will say that this motorcycle chase was one of the best things about the movie. The end of the motorcycle chase was like the most absurd thing you've ever seen in your life, but up until that point, I was really enjoying this action scene. Ang Lee did try to shoot this film in 128 frames per second, I think, and obviously they're experimenting with the de-aging technology. Although technically, I don't know if it's de-aging technology or if it's just like a full CGI motion capture performance. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, Ang Lee is usually trying to push the boundaries on technology and camera work and what you can and can't get away with in terms of filmmaking. CGI scenes, especially at night when characters are just sitting still, photorealistic, it is very lifelike, and that's where the frame rate really helps the movie, I feel like. Now we've reached the part of the review where it's my job to inform you, the audience, the viewer, the person who might be going out to spend money on this movie. You should not spend money on this movie, or at least you shouldn't spend your money on this movie, because this movie's boring as hell. Story is boring, the way it decides to tell its story is boring, the way it decides to flesh its characters out. Boring, boring, boring. The villain of the movie is boring. Hell, most of the action sequences are kind of boring. As far as the story goes, obviously you've seen a premise like this before, an assassin who's being hunted by another assassin. Obviously one of the assassins has been trained by the same person that trained the other assassin, and there's some kind of conspiracy. Like, basically, you can take bits and parts of this plot and apply it to hundreds of thousands of other movies you've seen over the years. That's okay if a movie is cliche, as long as it recognizes what's good about those cliches, as long as it executes it with high-level filmmaking, or if it tries to tell the basic story that you've seen before in a new and interesting way. This movie does none of that. The filmmaking isn't really that exceptional. The story, of course, is as boring and basic as you know it is. The way they decide to tell the story is just no, bro. Like, it's sleep-inducing. There is endless upon endless upon endless piles of expositional dump in this movie. There's nothing in this movie but a bunch of people just sitting around and explaining the entire story to you. Every movie in the history of ever has exposition. I get that. I get that a movie has to have exposition at some point. This movie relies on it to the point that it becomes such a crutch where almost every other scene is just a gigantic exposition dump where characters just sit down and they try to tell the audience everything that they need to know. You combine that with the fact that this is a story that you've seen before and is incredibly predictable, and you just feel like, okay, this is boring as hell. You get to the action sequences and you realize the action sequences really aren't all that impressive. I don't know if it's the frame rate, I don't know if it's the visual style that Ang Lee decided to go with for this movie, but for whatever reason, half of the action scenes look like shit. There are full CGI action sequences in this movie, and it just looked so fake, so cartoonish. It took me out of the movie every time. The characters and the way that they move in the daylight and in the action scenes in this movie, like it's video game level bad. And I'm not saying that to disrespect the video games of today, because the video games of today actually have really good motion graphics and really good CGI. When I say video game quality, I'm not talking about the games of today. I'm saying it's video game quality compared to the video games of today. Seriously, this is Sega Generation 1 or PlayStation 1, maybe even Nintendo 64, Atari or something. It honestly reminded me of Galaga that I used to play in the arcade at the dentist office when I was like 5 or 6. That works for the dentist office, that doesn't necessarily work for a live action movie. Combined with some really poorly written dialogue that almost insults the audience with how dumb it is, you're left with a movie that at the end of the day, I can't recommend to anybody, and I definitely wouldn't want to see again. Gemini Man was a boring ass excuse for an action movie, and this one is gonna get my second lowest rating of Kryptonite. I have no doubt that some people are gonna be entertained by it, but I wouldn't waste the money on it. So tell me, what is your favorite Will Smith movie of the last 5 years? Put that in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Superfan Show, and if you like what you see, tell me how you feel, and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.